to introduce our speaker, our representative in the California Assembly, the 16th District, Catherine Baker. Catherine Baker is an amazing woman. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa with honors from the University of Chicago, went on to Bolt Hall Law School at the University of California, got a law degree, clerked for several judges, worked at a law firm in San Francisco for a while, and then worked for Splendorio, his law firm in Pleasanton, and then became an Assemblywoman in 2014. And I'm so excited and privileged to have her with us, Catherine Baker.
Great. I'm going to liberate myself from the podium. Thank you, Rotarians. This is a very special place for me to visit. I love all of our Rotary chapters. My grandfather and uncle founded the Rotary chapter club in my hometown of Cathedral City, California. When I was growing up, my grandmother was the first woman member of that chapter many years ago. And we, I think our family single-handedly held the barbecue for the entire Rotary club every year. And I'm a recipient, not once but twice, of the RILA, Rotary Youth Leadership Awards, and the speech competition. It's wonderful influence on me when I was in high school and college. And so it's, Rotarians have a very special place in my heart, and I'm very grateful to get to visit you. And I can, this whole meeting has been a reminder why. Most of your good time together is fellowship and celebrating what you're doing in our community. And so many folks who have been members, like Marty, for 40 years of this club, and new members, and the work that you're doing in the community. So I thank you for letting me be a part of your day, especially since the first time I was supposed to be, I couldn't make it. I had a vote. And you should probably fine me for not making it at the last minute. That vote kept me from coming, so I'm glad it worked out this week. I thought I would just say a little bit about what have I been doing for the last year and a half that I've been in office. I get to be a freshman at my age, which is great. This has been my first term. What I'm working on coming into the year, what I see lying ahead, and then just open up for questions with as much time as allows. I know we have a hard stop at 1:30, which is probably good for you because I may otherwise drone on as I get into legislation. But just want to visit with you about a couple different topics and then hear your questions and your feedback. This last year, I've really focused on 4 key areas. They were the 4 that was originally inspired me to run for state assembly. I had not run for office before. I'd been active in our community in many different ways, primarily in our school system. And so one of those key 4 areas is absolutely education. I'm a mother of school-age twins. My kids, I live in Dublin, so right next door. My kids are now 7th graders. I'm very efficient. I had a boy and a girl all in one go. And you know, like so many parents, I think in this room and in our community, I was seeing things that were working in our schools and things that were not. And we were kind of doubling down, particularly in the Great Recession, on the things that weren't working. And I just went to the principal and said, okay, what thankless committee have you not put me on yet that I can be a part of making some changes, some long-term changes? And he said, there isn't a committee like that. You have to go to Sacramento. So education is truly why I even thought about running for state assembly. I focused a good deal in a few areas in education, and I could easily spend the whole hour. So if I touch on a topic that you'd like to visit more about, please ask in the Q&A. But I focus on what are the resources, first of all, our state is sending to our schools. And are we doing enough? We are not. We're still ranked almost last in per student funding. But are we giving them resources they need? And then how are we spending it? Because you can send all the money in the world at something, but if you're not really prioritizing and spending well, you won't see much of a difference. And our 4th graders in the statewide, not in our area, but statewide, are ranked 46th and 47th in math and reading. And it doesn't get much better by 8th grade, it's 45th and 46th. So to that end, one of the key areas that I advocate for in school funding has to do with a very bad policy that was implemented in 2014. It's called the cap on reserves. It's a policy that tells our local school districts you're not supposed to have a reserve fund, a rainy day fund of your own. Most of the school districts in our area keep reserves of about 12 to 15%. It varies a little bit from year to year. It's for the multipurpose room or computers or other resources. And our state has a policy now before I was there that says if certain economic conditions trigger in the state, they are forced to spend that down to about 5%, which means when we slow down again in our economy, which will happen someday, they're going to be issuing pink slips to our teachers and cutting our schools again, much earlier than they otherwise would have. So I've authored a bill and have been fighting for the last year. I'm just repealing that. Go back to local control, the way we had it, so that we can be making decisions about good financial policy in our schools at the local level. And in that area about how do we spend it, focused a good deal on authoring and working cooperatively and really bipartisan on legislation to support our teachers. My mom was a public school teacher in California for over 20 years. I get to brag about her. She was Teacher of the Year twice. And middle school, when I was my most obnoxious, so really something else. We don't give them enough lifelong, career-long professional development. It's really concentrated in the first few years, and then they get tenure about 2 years into their career. And it's pretty spotty training and professional development after that, pretty spotty evaluation and feedback and support. And our teachers deserve better than that. And our principals need to have that too. They're part of it. And so I really work on legislation to reform some of those policies. They're from before, I mean, I think I'm young, but it's before I was born when we started some of these ways that we are treating our teachers and our principals. And we can do better by that. So the third area I focus on in education has to do with higher education. I'm vice chair of the Higher Education Committee, and I firmly, passionately, doggedly believe that our UC system should be for Californians first, and not relying on out-of-state students just to make up for economic shortfalls. And I fight for that. So I offer quite a bit of legislation. This is another area where there's room for bipartisan support on how we can be helping UC to get its finances under control and put our California students first in admissions and graduation. And also Cal State. Cal State's had a little bit less challenge in that area, but they do just openly rely on more out-of-state students because they can charge them more. So education, as I said, I could spend the whole time talking about, that's a big area that I focus on. Another of the 4 areas, and I almost call them pillars because they're really that important, includes infrastructure. Probably don't need to convince anybody in this room the importance of good transportation and water in California. We have the 580 corridor right in our own backyard in our community. And if you're in the Greater Bay Area and you want to connect with Interstate 5 and the rest of California, you go through this district. Maybe if you're going north, where there aren't as many people, you might go 80, but otherwise, all of the goods movement from the Port of Oakland, which is one of the busiest ports in the West Coast and the Western Hemisphere, and all of our commute traffic connecting the Central Valley and the rest of the Bay Area comes through our area. And we know that because we see the parking lot that there is every day. There are also 5 BART stations in the Assembly District that I represent, which goes from Livermore all the way to Orinda. And if you don't have a parking space by 7:30, you're driving. Even if you want to commute, or you are parking on our city streets, and it doesn't leave parking for other local economic use. So I'm a member of the Transportation Committee, and I work very hard on those 2 areas. How can we be investing and getting more capacity out of our existing infrastructure, and how can we get BART where it is actually able to provide continuous and reliable service, which is one of its greatest challenges right now. The first bill I introduced was addressing this, and that was on BART strikes. The BART strikes, and it's okay to applaud that one. The BART strikes in 2013, the 2 of them, cost $73 million a day in economic activity just in our area, just in the Bay Area. And regardless of your partisan background, regardless of your job, everybody was affected by it. And it resulted in a contract that is now going to have bonuses of $1,000 to BART workers when we can't get the system actually working reliably, including in parts of this district. So that's a big area that I focus on. Happy to really give you every detail. I've co-authored 9 bills that are to reinvest in our transportation infrastructure in California in the smart way. One of those does include addressing high-speed rail. There may be a day for high-speed rail in California, but not this project. I've got a nice list of better investments of high-speed rail. Another area of infrastructure is water. And boy, am I glad we got rain the last few weeks because I was getting a little panicky in February. We wash away 1 million to 6 million acre-feet a year of water in California because we are not able to store it. We have not invested in water storage in California in over 26 years. And we did pass a water bond, voters of California, in 2014. My job is to make sure that it's actually going into water storage and the areas that we're supposed to. It's going a little slow. My first urgency vote that the governor called us in to make was last April, and it was, I saw in the bill analysis, which I read, I have reading glasses now because I actually read the bill materials. It said water bonds. I said, that's great, you know, it's about 4 months after we passed the water bond, it's time to get on it. And it was for the 2006 water bond, 9 years later, because the 10-year allocation period was about to end. So I voted for it. I said, we really don't need to take 9 years to get off the dime. So to that end, I work on how we can streamline the regulatory process. Not get rid of it, we need to protect our environment, but streamline it so that we can get these water projects moving. Shasta and other reservoirs that you've seen in the state are releasing water because the site's reservoir has not been built, and we built it 20 years ago. We could fill it in about 3 days. And so one of the delays is the regulatory review process. We make exceptions for that review process for sports stadiums. The Warriors Stadium in San Francisco, the Kings Stadium in Sacramento, which I don't care about, I'm a Warriors fan. If it's good enough for sports stadium, I think it's good enough for our water and our roads, and I think we should do that. So, infrastructure, education, infrastructure, I'll try to do lightning round so I'm leaving more time for questions. I just believe in pro-job policies. I don't just say pro-business, but pro-job policies. I come from a family business background. My dad and Uncle Fred and grandfather who started the Rotary Club in Cathedral City. We ran a small family business, about 19 employees. It was office machinery. My first few jobs as secretary, I could clear any copier jam and change toner without getting black powder everywhere. And in the time that I've had the privilege of actually practicing law, including with great colleagues, Flynn, really focused on what we can be doing for family-owned businesses. Usually a family component, but our private community businesses, and our state makes it really difficult. We have California, make no mistake, is the best place to live. It is. We have the best state, the best place in the world. But we do have some things that we could do better. And one area I focus on is flexibility. More flexible work arrangements, more flexible employment rules. We have very, very rigid rules that you can get exceptions to, but we don't make it particularly easy. And so I've been authoring a lot of bills and working with colleagues in a bipartisan way on how we can bring more flexibility in the workplace. It provides more flexible work schedules, for example, for employees, which is what people want, and for employers. And so that's sort of the signature area in a pro-job policies. There's a lot more we can do in California to be a state again companies flock to, but that's one area. And the final of the 4 areas is a little less spicy, but it's important, and that's just financial discipline. And that does mean saying no, which my kids will tell you I'm very good at a lot. There is a great need for us to continue to pay down debt, to have our own state's reserves, so that when we see economic downturns, we don't experience what we did a few years ago, where we're cutting police, we're cutting fire, we're cutting every city service and every school service we possibly have. So I started, my first act, in fact, was to not take the per diem, it's extra pay, it's tax-free money that legislators are given in addition to their base pay. And I did that on my first day in office. It's about 30 grand a year. I should probably talk to my husband about it before I did that. And I thought other people would do it. I think I'm the only legislator who did it. But it is, it's important. If you're going to tell other people you shouldn't be spending extra money that you don't need to spend, you should start in your own spot. And so a lot of that area in financial discipline does have to go with trying to help with our pension, unfunded pension liability. And just a month ago, I was able to vote on reforming our health insurance plan, tax and financing, where we finally got to pay down for the first time in a long time unfunded retiree health care, as well as transportation bond interest. $1 of every $2 in transportation spending goes to paying off the bonds from prior times. So we got to get those paid down and get focused again. So those are the 4 areas that I just dig in on. There are many others that I get all kinds of votes that come up over the last few years, that last 18 months, it's like dog years. But it's key areas that I focus on. Going into this year, maybe I can say a little bit about what I see lying ahead. I'm working much more on the out-of-state student reliance issue that UC and Cal State has, and working with the chairman, bipartisan again, of the Higher Education Committee on that. We have quite a few public safety related bills because in the wake of Prop 47, we've seen our property crimes go up in every community in my Assembly district, double digits. And that's because I believe we've decided to have a policy where what used to be a felony is now a misdemeanor, and folks are able to plead to that and head back out. And we're fortunate that we have great law enforcement in our own community. And it's wonderful to welcome 2 new members of that community protecting us. But I'll tell you, we need to make it a little bit easier because we've got double digits, 50% increase in the San Ramon-Danville area. And that's double digit just about everywhere in Alameda County. So I'm working on that to make sure that we can have a safer community and help our local law enforcement. But that's kind of the year ahead. There is an election coming up. That is a separate topic. I kind of put a firewall between my official service and election. I'm sure you're relieved. Oh God, thank goodness it's not going to be an election speech. But I don't get into that very much. Happy to visit with you separately about it. But it has been a really good year. And if I could tell you the one thing I have learned before we visit on questions, it is that, you know, when I was elected, it was very disruptive. When I won, the first time a Republican has won in the Bay Area in over 8 years, and the first time Republicans flipped a previously Democratic seat in over 30. And my seat broke the 2/3 supermajority that my colleagues have on the other side of the aisle. So it was a little disruptive. I wondered, what would I be able to get done? Would we have a year where anything could happen? And we had a successful year. There's been, every member's allowed to introduce 40 bills. I don't recommend you do that. That's too much. There's 80. That's over 3,000 bills if we all did the max. I focused on a handful, and they all passed, about 4 of them passed with bipartisan, unanimous support, and the governor signed them. Bringing some accountability to the Bay Bridge project, finally. Some transparency for that. Bringing some support to our veterans as they transition from active duty into higher education. Help them get into higher education and give them resources so they can complete a degree and begin their next adventure. We were doing nothing to really support them at the state level. Worked very, very hard on preventing child abuse in schools. And that was the bill I was most proud of the governor signing. We've had too many headlines across the state of that being a problem. And it was good to see that happen. And what I learned from that is bipartisanship works. It's hard. There are a lot of pressures on members of both parties to toe the party line. And if you can just break from that and withstand the flack that you will get from it, better things happen. All the major challenges facing our state need to be solved through bipartisan cooperation. I don't mean 1 or 2 members of the other side of the aisle. I mean like a whole lot more. And I got a taste of that this year. It was good. And I hope that is the way we'll see more people go, because it really, really does work. So with that, I want to say thank you. I see hands firing up already. So let's go for questions. That's the best part. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Do you believe that the bar train operators should have the right to strike?
No. I'm just going to give you a straight up answer. I don't. As I said, the first bill I introduced was to address BART strikes. And BART is essential to mobility in the Bay Area. That's not the case with every transit system in every part of the country, but there's no question about it. Almost 500,000 people ride BART a day. And when there are strikes, you know how our freeways are. People can't get to work, they can't get to their family members they're caring for. God forbid there's one of our earthquakes when BART's on strike. And I believe they're too essential to public mobility for them to be allowed to strike. The bill I introduced kind of tackled the problem in a different way. Because the BART contract has a no strike clause. BART workers promise not to strike. What happens every single time it expires is the BART workers say, well, it's expired, so we're not bound by it anymore. So they wait until the contract expires, and they negotiate for several more months. My bill says this: if you already agreed not to strike, and the contract expires, and you keep getting paid under that contract, you have to honor all of the contract too, including no strike clause. You can't cherry pick say, well, I'll take the payment, but I won't honor the no strike clause. You have to honor both, and that's fair to workers and fair to riders, in my opinion. And that's why I introduced that as my very first bill. So, and folks, the next BART, we're on a clock, because the next BART contract expires in June of next year. And it usually takes them 6 to 8 months to negotiate. They need to start now and start to build up some goodwill and get it done well before it expires. So I'll keep working on that. Thank you.
Did your bill pass?
Did my bill pass? Great question. So it died in February on a strictly party line vote. We were told it would never get out to committee. It did. We were told it would never get a hearing. It got 2. And we were told it would die that same day, and I used the whole year to educate other members. This is going to be an uphill battle. I will work tirelessly on it, and I'll go back to my members of the Bay Area and say, if you really want to go back to your district in a year from now and say I did nothing on the BART strikes. So I keep the pressure on. Thank you. Yes?
I have lots of questions and comments with regard to education, but let me just turn to the BART issue. The parking lot, at least here locally, is so small that it can't accommodate the potential traffic that BART could carry. And that was a policy decision by the BART board long ago when they put it in.
That's correct.
And it should be reversed.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you on that one. I live in Dublin, and my husband takes BART to work every day, and there was a time when I did as well. BART agreed and did a whole environmental study at the Dublin Pleasanton station, and part of that study included an expanded parking structure in addition to the multi-story one that's there. They have chosen not to do that and to put it into the environmental review for BART to Livermore. And so I have been in a major advocacy role with BART. This doesn't take a bill. I'm trying to keep it from taking one, saying that the environmental work has already been done. It's your job to build it. And Supervisor Scott Haggerty is someone that we work with very closely on that, because as chair of the Alameda County Board, he and I both know that was part of the plans. And right now it's a surface parking lot. It's supposed to be multi-story. The reality is, let's say we get 1,000 more parking spaces there, that still won't be enough. We still have to have park and ride. I'm actually a co-author of a bill with a Democratic colleague that is to have a test project for driverless vehicles and driverless buses to connect people to park and rides in our area to the BART stations, because that has dramatically lower cost to operate because there's no labor costs. And it's an exciting opportunity to do something like that, and I'll be looking forward to that. You're absolutely right. That station should be built. And it is an area that needs great bipartisan cooperation at both county, and I'm grateful for Scott Haggerty's support in trying to fight for that. Thank you. Other good ones?
So I have a quick question.
Yes.
I'm curious, I have limited understanding about this, but my limited understanding is the amount that developers have to contribute into to make available to schools, to build new schools. The cap on how much, we see this in Dublin, right? They keep building, 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 and they don't have a place to go to school.
Yep.
What's up?
Great question. So, and I live in Dublin, I'm feeling it. My kids are at one of the most overcrowded schools, and it affects their ability to get classes, it affects their electives, it's having a dramatic effect. I had a town hall on education in December, and children came and talked about how difficult it is because it's so crowded. Back about 20 years ago, there was a deal reached with developers and environmental groups on when you can charge higher development fees. They're called level 3 fees. What's required is that the state not have bond money that it can be allocating to schools. As long as there's money in a pot at the state level for school bonds, you can't charge, our local communities are not allowed to charge the higher developer fees unless they work something out one-on-one. And we have a school bond from 10 years ago. The only reason it still has money in it is because there's a tiny amount that's allowed only for earthquake retrofit. But otherwise, it's empty. And Dublin alone could probably use whatever other funds are in there if they could free up. So what I've done is I've endorsed a school facilities bond that's on the next ballot in November. And you won't see me endorsing a lot of bonds. It's debt, and we have to pay off that debt, and it takes money away from actual capital improvements. But it's part of the state's role in helping fund our local schools. And the state does historically have that role. It's not all on developers, and it's not all on our local school districts. The state has always been a part of that, and it's one area I disagree with the governor. He doesn't want the state to do that anymore. Well, when a piece, 1 acre of land, for building is going to cost $5 million in Dublin, for example, when you've got how much it's going to cost just to buy the raw land for a new school, you have to get state involvement. And it affects not only communities that have new schools they need. We have schools in this district that are 70 years old. And yes, communities are putting everything they can locally into the infrastructure. The state has a role. So that's why I've endorsed the bond and fervently believe we actually need to pass that. The bond passed unanimously in the legislature last time around. My predecessor had it and Governor Brown vetoed it. It's one of those areas that we just disagreed. So we're having to put it on the ballot, and I strongly suggest that folks take a good look at it. If you're not inclined to normally vote for bonds, we're talking about our school facilities and the ability of there to be room for kids in the classroom, and it's important. So thank you. Yeah, this is a great question.
A quick question,
yes.
And maybe a quick answer.
Well, that's a challenge for me, but I will try.
The unfunded pensions, you hear this problem not just in the States, not just in the country, but in other countries. It appears to me to be a very big problem. And it was set up incorrectly, I would imagine, to begin with. So in your estimation, this is why it's going to be a quick answer. Is this a really serious problem?
It is
Is it something our children should be worried about?
Absolutely. And the way you can tell is if you understand anything about principal and interest. And if every day you're in debt, you are digging yourself a hole that they are going to be left with. And it is of such a large scale, hundreds of billions of dollars, that you can't tax enough to pay for the unfunded pension liability, and you cannot slash government services enough to pay for it. It has to be restructured in a way that provides the pension for those who earned it. I really don't think you should go back and take something away, but you've got to structure it sustainably, because when those bills come, and more in the workplace are retiring, we don't have the ability to tax enough or to cut government services enough to pay for it. It has to be restructured. And there are measures that I've supported. They are bipartisan measures to restructure how our pensions can be done at the local level. Leave most of that to the local authorities, but right now state law limits most of the pension funds in the state of California from doing the restructuring they need to do. And that is one of the biggest threats to our financial stability in the state. So, thank you. That was pretty short answer. Thank you. I think I'm happy to stay for more questions. And I just want to thank you very much for having me again. I look forward to visiting again. This is a wonderful club. $55,000 a year just from the foundation into our local community is fantastic. Thank you for letting me join you today for the hospitality. Happy to stay for questions. And thank you, Rotarians. It's great.